Hi everyone. Thank you for coming and sharing your lunchtime with me. And my name is Naresh Agarwal. I am currently an assistant professor at SLIS, newly tenured Survey Associate from July. Thank you. This talk is it's very important to me because I worked on this study for a couple of years. I think it was like 2.5 years of observation and then about 2 or 3 years writing and various revisions trying to get it published. And now it's a chapter in this book. It's the first chapter in this book on new directions in children's and adolescents' information behavior research. So I'm pretty excited to talk about this. So it's use of touch devices by toddlers and preschoolers. So by the touch devices, we mean mostly, as for this study, it was iPhone and iPad, but it could be other devices as well. And the reason I say toddlers or preschoolers is because it's based on the study of a single child, and the child was a toddler when the observation started. So a toddler is a person who's, as you know, is just beginning to walk, and a preschooler is, I think, after 2.9 years. So the study is based on observing a child between the ages of 2 and 4.5 years. And it started after the second version of iPhone 2 had come out. So it was until then and when iPad 2 had come out. So pretty much from around 2010 till around the end of 2012, early 2013. That's a period of observation. So why am I interested in this study? And that's because even though a lot of researchers have studied people as to how do people look for information and where do they go when they have need for information, whether they go to the library or whether they go to other people, not very many people have studied children. And even those who have studied children and where they go in terms of children's information behavior, there has not been a lot of work done in children's interaction with technology, especially touch-based devices, because these devices, as you know, are very new. They only started coming out in the last couple of years. So while children have started using them, not much research has happened in this area thus far. And the other reason is that parents of this generation have found the iPad and the iPhone as a device which is perhaps the best toy ever invented for children. So it could keep them occupied for hours at an end, and parents could do whatever they want. Now some parents are okay with that, and other parents are grudgingly okay with that. Some parents are guilty, that they feel guilty doing this. So parents do not really know how to handle this. They just know it as a fact that children like using devices. Children as small as a few months old start playing with the touch, and it's very intuitive, so they start using it without much guidance. But how much to guide a child or not in this process is a big thing. So some parents try to limit the use to like 1 hour, half an hour a day or something, and some parents like to leave it to the child to let the child use as much as the child wants to. So this study seeks to provide some sort of a guidance as to what is right, what's wrong, or what could be the best practices based on observing the single child. So this was the primary motivation for this study. And also, this is looking at those parents who want to look at devices and want to put it to sleep so that the child could do other things. Yeah, and this is the concern of parents. So here you see a phone on the bed and the child not on the bed. So it's more about putting the phone to sleep, and so you can spend more time playing with the child. These pictures were sent to me by a friend from my high school yesterday when I told him about this talk today, and he said that, oh, I have some pictures that I've been working on, and maybe you can use this for your talk. So this is by Toddlers and his partner Samika. So this is what the study does. Observes a single child through the journey of growing to a preschooler and the usage of iPad and iPhone in this process. And it also seeks to provide a framework for effective usage of these devices while ensuring all-round cognitive as well as intellectual development of the child. So the first question that this study sought to answer was, why do toddlers or preschoolers use touch-based devices. Why is it that they decide to use it? What engages them? Why do they decide to sustain this engagement? And also, what's the difference between engaging with touch-based devices versus engaging with objects in the physical environment? So is there a difference between these two? The second question is, what are the enabling factors for using the iPad and iPhone by a toddler or preschooler? What gets them started? What are the conditions that need to be in place? What are the set of tasks that are performed by the child? And what change occurs in the usage of these devices over time as a child grows from a toddler to a preschooler? And how does the time spent on using these devices relate to the time that is spent interacting with the physical environment and with people around? Now, the third research question was, how should a child effectively engage with these devices while ensuring all-around cognitive and physical development? So I used a combination of literature as well as observation to answer these questions. The first question was based on prior theories in child's engagement with technology, and the others were based on observation from the study. So there has been a lot of literature in this field, and this has been, I'm not going to go through a lot of literature, but there's been studies looking at children's information behavior and children's interaction with technology in terms of how a child searches the web, a child's interaction with library catalogs, with digital libraries, and with mobile technology. So I have the book chapter in the book as well, and also digitally, because this is about touch-based devices. So I might use either or as I read this. So the more interesting parts are in the theoretical perspectives, which guided the study. And the first was about how does a child decide to adopt these devices? And there are, in this decision, there are two things. One is the decision to adopt. So at the point of engagement, what happens at this point? So there's a theory called the task technology fit theory by Goodyear and Thompson. So according to this theory, whenever we decide to do a particular task, and when we decide to use a technology, so that technology and the task must fit together for us to be able to use the technology well. And that's one reason why people decide to use the technology. Let's say whether you decide to use an iPhone or an iPad or a laptop or a computer or any other device, or a projector, for instance. So maybe this screen and a projector is a good thing is useful for a presentation, and that's why we use it. So there has to be some sort of a fit that happens. And the other is a theory called the technology acceptance model. And according to this theory, people decide to use the technology for two reasons. One is that it must be useful, and the second is that it must be easy to use. So both the ease of use and usefulness of a technology play a very important role in whether somebody decides to adopt or not. So from a child's point of view, these devices are very, very easy to use. The usefulness part is not there because the child is not really doing any important task out there. But the ease of use is a big factor that anybody can use in that sense, and a child who has not learned to speak yet can use it. So that's a big part in why a child decides to engage in this. But the second question comes in as to why does a child decide to continue to use it? Using it once is a different thing. So what is it in these devices that it sustains the engagement over time? So here, a few things come in. One is the aesthetic experience. So it's very, very nice and aesthetically pleasing, which plays a very important role in why a child decides to use it. And then you also have another theory which is related called the radical change theory. And according to Dressan's theory, this theory sees digital objects and hypertext formats as bringing about a positive shift in the reading interaction of a child based on three principles. One is interactivity, connectivity, and access. So these devices are interactive. It means that it's different from watching television, where you're passively sitting and you cannot do anything. You're just watching. Here you can interact and it responds to you. So that plays an important role. And you're able to connect and you have access, the children have access to it. So this theory is based on 4 assumptions. One is that children are capable and they're seeking connections. So it does put a certain degree of trust in a child's capability as per this theory. And that a digital environment nurtures a child's capability, that's the second principle. And that handheld books in iPhones and iPads, they offer digital age connections to the child. And the fourth is that adults and youth, including toddlers and preschoolers, are partners in the digital world. So it does give a fair amount of trust in a child's capability to be able to use this device to form connections. So the engagement is a big part, and other people have looked at the wow experience. So these devices are something which does bring about a wow experience, and that's why a child wants to use them. So O'Brien and Toms in 2010, they talked about 4 things with respect to these devices. So one was about the point of engagement, what happens at the point of engagement. The other is what happens with sustained engagement. And the third is disengagement, when does a child decide not to use these. And the fourth is re-engagement, when you decide to use these again. So I make my framework based on these 4 points of a child's use of these devices. So what was the method used? It's beeping. No, it's based on naturalistic observation. It was basically observing the child from very close quarters, and also immersing yourself in the child's natural environment over time and seeing what the child does. So any other way was not really possible to capture data in this, because first we had to do usability studies of these devices. Again, those are not very easy to capture in an iPad as compared to a lab for that purpose. And also, how do you capture this behavior over a sustained period of time? So it's really a qualitative case study, but more of an ethnography, looking at a child over a sustained time period. So it provided the right sort of environment to do a study of this nature. So according to McCarthy and Wright, it is only by seeing technology as participating in felt experience that we understand the fullness of its potential. So while we can say all kinds of things about technology, but really when you look at it as how a human being interacts with it and what you feel about it, it's not technology in itself which makes it powerful, it's about humans, and whether if it makes a life more meaningful or not, that's the part which is more important. And this is the part which I was trying to study over here. So to capture my data, my primary sources of data were the apps itself from the iPad. So the common apps which I used to gather data was based on the photos that were taken by the child and the videos that were captured by the presses, by the key presses that the child did, the phone calls that were made by the child, and all the hefty bills that came in by the phones that were done. The YouTube videos, the history of the YouTube videos which was there, that was watched by the child. And as the child grew older, the parent made a mistake of teaching the child to do a keyword search. So then there used to be a history of terms such as Dora and Pocoyo and all of these, and based on this the child could pull out the videos, and it no longer depended on having YouTube as a device, because earlier the child would go and search for YouTube, and then whenever the parent didn't want the child to watch videos, the YouTube app could be deleted or hidden away. But now, because of the keyword search, as long as Safari was there, the child would go and pull out the videos. And also based on interactive games that the child played. Now, the powerful part about this is that even though we think of it as child's engagement, but really if a parent does a good job of managing this engagement, then you can really think about your goal as a parent in terms of what is it that you want your child to learn over a period of time. So let's say that you want your child to learn how to read time, for instance. Then you could have apps based on time, on reading time for that time period, and that's what the child gets easy access to, and you can hide away or delete the other apps. If you want your child to learn a particular language, then you can have games and apps based on that particular language, which forms a part of the environment that the child is using. So it's really in this particular case, so most of the apps which the child had access to were based on the time period or whatever the developmental needs of the child at that point in time. If it was engaging with shapes and colors, it was shapes and colors which were there visible at that point most of the time. So there were unstructured notes which were taken during this period, and these notes were structured around a few areas. So they included like notes on which apps were most commonly used, and what were the sequence of steps performed in accessing a particular app or doing a certain behavior, and what were the times when the child sought help from a parent or from another grown-up in using certain apps, and what were the set of tasks that were performed by the child using these devices, what were the difficulties those were encountered, and how did the child overcome those difficulties, and finally, was there any change in the preference of device over time. So let us look at some of those findings now. So the child in this case, with a change in name, was Ella, and the name change was done to protect the child's confidentiality because the child was too young to provide informed consent. And so how do you really so a child may or may not be okay with being studied and observed once a child grows up, but until you can be certain, then you at least try and change the name. So this child was born in a period of late 2000 onwards, after the iPhone and the iDevices had come out, and started taking to these devices from a very early age. And one big reason was that the child had very easy access to these devices around the house. So the child had access to, I think, two iPhones and an iPad. And later, when the parents switched to another iPhone, upgraded, the child had access to an iPhone and an iPad all the time. And one big issue that used to happen was that once the child would use the device and complete it with all the charge, and immediately pick on a parent's device. so that runs out of charge again. So that was a very normal behavior, and until the child was taught to start charging the device once you run out of charge. And the parents in this case felt much better when the child used the iPad as compared to the iPhone, because the phone was more useful as a device, and running out of charge for a phone was more risky, especially when the parents were traveling outside. So let's look at a few of the findings. So why do toddlers or preschoolers use touch-based devices? So these were based on the theories which we discussed earlier in terms of the ease of use of the device, the aesthetics, and the look and feel, being able to feel it. Those were very important factors for the user engagement in these devices. And Anastasia, you were here.
Yeah.
So Anastasia, she did a study on physical objects as to why do people decide to engage with physical objects. And I've cited her study in this work. So she writes that user engagement with physical objects is immediate because there are no barriers between the user and the artifact. So when you decide to engage with let's say, this bottle out here, then there's no barrier. You can touch it, you can feel it, and people don't have to think twice before being able to use it. And what makes the iPad or the iPhone unique as compared to other physical devices is that it is not just digital. People think of these as digital because if this is digital, because it's out here and I'm sitting in front of it, and people say that I don't like reading from a screen, and which is different because when you're trying to read a book from a screen versus you're trying to hold this, that is a very different experience. But then when you think about these devices, they are not just digital, they're both digital and physical. You're able to hold it and then engage with it digitally. So it's really a physical device with digital content. So many of the characteristics of physical devices which make physical things so appealing to humans all over the world, those were there in these devices because of the size, because of a child could easily hold it, and being out there as easy access for the child. So that was one important part. And when you talk about the second part about difference between engaging in touch-based devices versus engaging with objects in the physical environment. So here again, one big part was a theory called embodiment. Embodiment meant that the child could take this device and embody it in the greater physical environment of which the child is a part of. So for instance, if the child is playing on a swing, there were times when the child could put the device on a swing and instead of swinging oneself, could swing the iPad and watch the video along with it. Or when you're playing with a sandbox, then you can be playing in the sandbox and the device could be on the side. And you're still making your sandcastles out there, and the device is out there like a person watching television. But rather than being locked in a living room watching television, here the child could take the device and do whatever the child wanted in whatever the natural setting that was there. So this big embodiment of this device in a greater physical environment brought about a nice sort of a balance between the physical and the digital, which was not very evident, or which earlier technologies did not allow. So what are the enabling factors for using the iPad and iPhone by a toddler or preschooler? So here, one big factor was access and connectivity. So the fact that the child could get easy access to these devices right from a very early age separated this child from a lot of other children around the world who do not have access to these devices. So that is one thing. But the second important part was also connectivity, which meant that because there was a high-speed internet connection available all the time in the house, the wireless connection was there. So whatever the child wanted to do, the child could instantly watch videos and get access. So this again is a big issue. Even if you take an iPad and give it to a child in another country where internet connectivity is slow or not available, then it doesn't have the same effect, because you cannot get access to the data and that interactivity right away as you would get out here. And the second was parental awareness and support. So parents being comfortable with these devices is also a very important part. Not just being comfortable, but also parents being supportive of child's use of these devices. So in this particular case, it was unique because it was a set of parents who were very comfortable with the child's use of the iPad. And they didn't really try at all to restrict the child's use of the iPad, except perhaps during meal times or when the child was traveling, and not because they didn't want the child to use the device, but they were scared that the phone would run out of charge. But otherwise, they were supportive and appreciative of the fact, and they were quite secure in the child's use of the iPad. And which is different, which is unique, because a lot of times when parents try to stop a child's use of the iPad, then the child's need for using it grows over time. And the more you try to stop a child, the more the child wants to use it. So in this case, what happened was that since the child knew that the child could use the device at any point in time, the child wanted to engage more with physical things. Because the device was always there, and the child didn't have to worry about using the device, so you could do other things and then come back to the device whenever you wanted to, in a sense. So parental comfort was a very important part in this, and also providing scaffolds for the child to learn. So which means that whenever you have a child is getting stuck in a particular point, a parent needs to be aware and watching for those times. Or when a child comes to you with difficulty, be ready to help the child overcome that step. So that was very important in a child's learning journey, because if you face a difficulty and if you do not have a solution to that, then the difficulties start growing over time. So being able to address that was important. And the other important thing is not giving a child a dedicated device earlier on, sharing the device between the parent and the child. Because when that happens, then a parent can look out for behaviors and look out for usage patterns of the device over time, and also address the difficulties of the child. So that way there's a degree of watchfulness that's happening for a very young child at that age. So to answer the question of what are the set of tasks that are performed, so here, now Ella, by the time she was 3, she was clicking photos with the iPhone using both the front and back facing cameras. And the initial photos and videos were sometimes often blurred and not composed very well. But by the time Ella was 4, she was clicking relatively well-composed photos, and she could also scroll through the photos and look at the pictures that were taken by others and by herself. And she could identify the initial letters in the list of contacts and being able to call a parent, and also identify the calls from people known to her when they came. And she also learned to take the phone to a parent as soon as, even if she was using a device and if there was a phone call, she could stop using it and give the phone to whoever the call was for. So the one issue with that was international calling, which the parents in this case addressed by removing the international dialing codes from numbers. So even if it called a local number from the contacts. And the other main issue was the YouTube application. So YouTube has a feature for blocking pornography and those kinds of sites, so to make it appropriate for child, but it does not have features to select a set of videos. So if a parent wants that a child only watches from a subset of videos and not anything else, so that feature was not really there. And that would be a very powerful feature to give, because even if you search for things like, say, Dora out there, which was safe for a child, but then you have videos where Dora is being murdered, or somebody is speaking things about Dora, or if a parent doesn't want to have a child watch annoying orange videos or something, then you still have access to those videos. So that was a big limiting feature of not being able to control which videos the child can watch and which videos the child can watch. So that would be a very important feature for a child, especially if a parent is trying to give a particular set of educational environment to a child at a given age. So we talked about keyword search, where the child could go and do a keyword search and also look at recent searches, and just by doing, let's say, PO, you get the entire portfolio and then click on that and you can get the video from there. And then there were other apps like jigsaw puzzles, reading interactive books, shapes and colors, drawing and coloring alphabet and words. So these are important things. The other big issue was the handling of devices. So there was once when the child dropped the device on a kitchen floor and then broke the screen. Again, so that's something to watch out for. You need to have very protective cases if you are giving the device to a child. And the other time was when the device was dropped in water. And when that happens again, you need to know the rice trick. where you take out the device, open it and put it, do not switch it on, and then put it in rice, uncooked rice for 2 or 3 days, and then switch it on and it'll be fine after that, because the rice will soak all the water. And we talked about the appropriateness of video content, so that was an important part. So the change in usage of devices over time. So here, the early exposure of the child was to nursery rhymes that were played on a computer to her, and as she grew older, she knew the cartoon characters that she wanted to watch. But her preference of types of apps also changed based on what she was learning at home or in school, or in terms of word formation or math or drawing or a language skill. So the one thing that changed by the time she was around 4 was that her preference from the iPad to the iPhone. She was more comfortable using the iPhone at that point and didn't want to use the iPad so much. And perhaps that was because, firstly, the iPhone was more easily accessible with one of the parents at any point in time, and also it was easier to hold. So you could easily hold it, keep it in one place. And the iPad was when you wanted to do a more dedicated thing like playing in a sandbox, where you kept it on the side. So that was a change from an early age to as a child got older. And also the other thing was that there were too many apps in the iPad, which was cluttered, and the parents didn't do a very good job of organizing it for the child. Whereas the iPhone was used by the parents, so it was more neat, so the child would get to the apps quite easily. So again, as a parent, you need to watch out for cleaning the iPad at regular points in time. In this case, the parents were told not to delete the apps because it was serving as data for the study. But if you're not doing any study, then you want to keep only those apps which are used by the child at that point in time, both for giving the child an environment and also to protect from information overload. So how does the time spent on using the iPad and iPhone relate to time spent interacting with the physical environment? So again, now when you talk about a child, there are a few things that defines a child's time. One is the play time, the time that a child spends playing, and the other is the time spent in interests, hobbies, and causes, and the third is the time spent communicating with others, and times of self-expression and identity. So in the context of Ella, so when you talk about play, so many of the interactions Ella made with the iPhone and iPad was seamless with the real world. So for example, when she sees an image of the moon on the iPad or in a book, and she saw the actual moon, and she remarked at its shape. So she could see the shape of the moon in terms of a circle or semicircle, and she could take it from the device and see that moon and relate both of these separately. Now there's a famous cartoon which is often shown. It's a picture of a painting, and what they show is that if somebody's trying to scroll across the painting and you tear it, And that is the kind of image which parents are scared of, that the child will not learn to distinguish between the digital and the physical. That you get so used to one environment that you don't really separate the two. And this wasn't the case in the case of Ella. She could, since she had easy access to it, she could distinguish between the shapes which were there of a picture of the moon that she's drawing, a picture of a moon on the iPad, and the real moon that she could see out there. And there was no confusion between these, and she could see all of them as seamless but separate. So that was an important thing. And also, if she was playing with a jigsaw puzzles, and if she was playing with a jigsaw puzzle on the device and a real jigsaw puzzle, those were separate, and she got good at both. So I think, based on this particular study, giving a child access to these devices and as well as physical objects can really mean a good, healthy interaction between those, and there's not really a conflict or a competition that's happening out there. And also the other part is about interests, hobbies, and causes. So a lot of the interests which were there in terms of playing with shapes or other things which the child has, again, giving the right apps at that point in time was important. So Ella's parents spent time with her as she painted on full-size canvases using a brush and paints and child-safe paint, and at the same time she had access to paint apps on the device, and she could again enjoy both in this process. And also, along with using the camera on the phone, she also liked using the other digital SLR camera and got comfortable with other devices as well apart from these. So in terms of communicating self-expression and identity, there was a sense of that this device is mine and I could play it and use it at any point in time. So her engagement with read aloud interactive ebooks was interspersed with requests to read aloud to her from a physical book. So she enjoyed both physical books as well as reading from the device or being read to from a device. So to answer the third and final research question as to how should a child effectively engage with touch-based devices while ensuring all-round cognitive and physical development. So there's a framework that is proposed. It looks pretty complicated as such. This is from the book. So here you have the child right on top. So you can read it from the top and then move this way. So here you have the child that is situated or embodied in a physical environment, and this child has personal unique attributes which are based on the personality as to what is mine. There could be a certain sense of being able to control certain things or possessing certain things. A child's unique identity, interests, hobbies, causes the child has at that point in time, curiosity, the age, and the child also shares this context with other people, plays, communicates, and expresses oneself. So this is unique for a unique child. So every child is different in that sense. You have to understand a unique context in which a child is situated. So from there onwards, according to this framework, a child is able to move seamlessly from the physical environment to the digital environment. So there is a very easy movement between the two. And here there are these four phases: point of engagement, sustained engagement, disengagement, and re-engagement based on O'Brien and Tom's study. So here, what are the things that help the child engage at this point of engagement? The accessibility of the device, the ease of use, aesthetics, the fact that it's interactive, it's portable, you can carry it around, and it has a variety of suitable apps which a child is interested in. So all of these are the factors which help a child with engagement of the device. And in terms of sustained engagement, so it's the aesthetics of the device, the fact that it's interactive, you can carry it around, and you can embody it within a larger physical environment that the child is situated in. And it has numerous qualities of touch, being able to feel it, being able to sense it, and also the variety of apps. So these are the things that continues to engage the child with the devices. And why does the child decide to disengage with the device? And that could happen when the child moves to a physical environment. So once you have paper jigsaw puzzles, you might not decide to play with the puzzles over there. Or once you have other friends to play with, you might not decide to play with the iPad or games over there. So a move to a physical environment or other interpersonal activity could be a factor. Or when a child encounters another device, such as a physical DSLR camera, so then a child decides not to use the device at that point. Or it could be a difficulty encountered. So you have an app which is there, which is too difficult for you to use, so you decide at that point you give up and you don't want to use it anymore. So these are the points of disengagement. And then when the child decides to re-engage again with the device, either it's time alone. So the parents are too busy doing their own work, or you do not have another child to play with, and you're alone at that point, and so you decide to pick up the device again, or you're bored with the other toys. Or it could just be a feeling of it's mine and it's a safe device for me to use whenever I want to. And then there's an emotional connection with the device that could be one factor where you decide to re-engage. Or it could be new apps that were recently installed. And at a later point, Ella could go and install apps off her own as well. She would just go to the parent and ask for the password, and then pick and choose the apps, related apps which showed up, and get all those new apps which she wanted. So it could be the novelty, the variety of new apps, and also when a parent helps with difficulties encountered. So then again you decide to re-engage with the device at that point. So what are the common tasks that are performed? So here again, at the point of engagement, it's photo taking, browsing, personalization based on the unique child which is there. Sometimes the parent could create an own content where you have a video taken of the parent reading to the child based on a certain app that the child or the parent is using. Also for learning languages or learning a foreign language, there could be apps based on that. And finding and accessing various content or discovering new apps. So these were also things which engage the child at that point. And things which sustain engagement over a period of time was videos. That's where Ella spent most of the time. And then it could be jigsaw puzzles, then drawing and coloring, and educational features such as shapes, colors, alphabet, word, math, games, and reading. So these are things which sustain their engagement over a period of time. So what are the parental precautions needed at each of these stages? So at the point of engagement, you need to make sure that the device is safe. The device itself is safe, so it has a good cover, and that you're keeping your device is charged. Also, keep track of bills. Again, in terms of undesired content, you need to keep that out. Provide content which is good for the child at that age. And also different parents are comfortable with different points in time as to how much time is enough for that particular child. So you need to limit access or decide on how much access is enough based on the particular needs or what a parent is comfortable with at that point. So some people have recommended not more than 30 minutes a day, but that was not in the case of Ella. So she had access to the device all throughout the day. And she would let go of it or leave it on whenever she felt like, and not when when a parent wanted to. And in terms of sustained engagement, again, be wary of information overload. That's a big thing. And some studies have suggested that the mind wandering that we do when we do not have anything else to do, let's say when we are walking and our mind is wandering to various directions, we're thinking of something, that's very, very important for a child's development. And the danger with these devices is that mind wandering time is not there. Whenever you are free, you don't want to let your mind wander, you just want to get back to a device to fill your time. So creating space for mind wandering is again very important for a parent to look out for a child. And there's a danger of distraction or zoning out if the child is not engaged sufficiently in other physical activities along with the digital activity. And also the watching out for inappropriate content, which is not just pornography, but it could be other content of her age which is not appropriate. And then at the point of disengagement again, making sure interpersonal interaction is there is very important. Trying to have healthy habits where if you're having dinner together, making sure that the child is talking to everyone and not just looking at the device at that point. So when to keep the device and when to pick it up, having that sort of a discipline inculcated in the child, not by pressurizing the child, but by explaining it to the child, where the child understands those things on her own. That was an important part as well. And again, providing input for creative thoughts and mind wandering. So in the case of Ella, she could go and draw stories that she wanted to create based on her birthday and things, and have various pictures for each version of a story, and creates little storybooks, even on physical paper, but also on the iPad. And finally, in terms of re-engagement, it's important to ensure shared usage, collaboration between the parent and the child, and also attending to problems that the child faces at that point. So the limitations of the study was that it was based on a single subject, and also it was based on a female gender, so maybe a male child could have behaved differently. And it was based on observation, so the other study, there was a limit to observation in the sense that you're only basing on what you see from a child, but what is the thought process behind every action of a child that you do not know very well at different points in time. And also, a usability study could be carried out where you actually do a screen capture and observe it more closely rather than from a distance. So that could be other things which could be done in further studies. So to conclude, it is possible to to design and to affect the usage of these devices in a manner in which you bring about a wholesome development of the child. And that part is very, very important. So I think I had a nice quote here somewhere. Let me see if I can get to that. But yeah, so one important part is that a child emulates a parent's behavior. So if you as a parent is hooked to the iPhone and you want your child not to be hooked to it, that's not possible. So if you really do not want any sort of digital devices in the house, then you should not get one. But saying that I'll use it but my child will not use it, that's really not a very effective strategy. So if you're comfortable with your own use or the amount of time you spend on the digital device, then I think it's only fair that you're comfortable with the child spending that time as well. And if you really want to limit a child's usage, then you should limit your own usage as well. So that was a very important point over here. So again, the apps and the factors leading to sustained engagement should be taken into consideration by parents or guardians, so to prevent overuse. So what are the things which are leading to the sustained engagement, and what sort of apps should be there, if those are appropriate for the child at that age. So this is the citation from the book chapter, and I'm ready for questions now.
I'll go back to the citation. Did you go back? I think it might be the title of the book.
This is the book here.
Since you didn't limit her time, how much time did she end up spending every day?
I think it would be
Did you ever monitor how much she?
it was a couple of hours. It used to be at least in 3 to 6 hours.
3 to 6 hours.
Yeah, 3 to 6 hours.
And how did you find the apps that were appropriate for her?
Those were based on age. So let's say that her preschool or her daycare is engaging her in shapes at that point. So then you get only those shapes apps. Or if if you want to teach a child a foreign language, then you get the apps based on the language.
And you just Google search shapes and.
You just search preschool shapes and you get a whole series of apps.
Did Ella have any siblings? I feel like that would be a very
Yes,
important.
and Ella did not have siblings at that point. So
she didn't have to share.
So she did not have to share because that would be a big factor,
Mm-hmm.
and in terms of time spent, because parents also use siblings as a way to let the child engage with each other, and so that they are free to do the other things. So in this case, the iPad was like a sibling for her as well.
Does she have her own now? Does she have her own iPad now? Or?
She does have her own iPad now. Yeah.
How long was the period in which you observed her?
This was 2.5 years. So by the time when the observation started when she was 2, and then until she was 4.5.
How did you come up with the idea that, okay, she engages 3 to 6 hours, so I can only engage 3 to 6 hours, that the parent should engage the same amount as the child? How did that come about?
No, not the same amount.
Or limit, or whatever.
In terms of the value system that you have for yourself,
Yeah.
it is important for you to be. So the amount of respect we give ourselves, or the amount of space we give ourselves, it's important to give the same amount of space to the child. And even though maybe you can limit the content in terms of some content is inappropriate or something, but the fact that we think that it's okay for us to use it, but it's not okay for the child, and that sometimes provides a child doesn't really know like why is it that you can do it and I can't do it.
Yeah.
So that becomes a problem in terms of the value system that you want to give to a child.
In terms of learning, was she at the same level as her classmates, or like in her age bracket, knowing shapes and colors and maybe reading?
Yes, she was the same or higher stages of learning, and I think I would say at least the same, if not higher, in terms of all her children in her age group. And at that point in time, I think parents and teachers had started understanding that being comfortable with digital devices was also important. So that part was also there along with the other engagement. So the only time when she did not engage to that 3 to 6 hour period was when she was in daycare or in school. There she'd get 30 minutes or 1 hour in the evenings, or a limited amount of time. But during weekends and other days, she would get those 3 to 6 hours.
And you never had any, it's a beautiful day, but she wants to stay inside and engage?
No, that never happened. It's a beautiful day, she would want to go out and play, but take her iPad along.
I see. lot of kids I know and work with, they wanna stay inside and just be on the iPad. They
Yes.
don't wanna go outside.
So I think in this particular time, the child wanted to stay around the parents. So if the parent was inside, then the child would typically either be on a parent's lap and then have the iPad, or be around. If the parent is outside, then the child will be outside. So it's I think this big part was embodiment, being able to take the device wherever you are. But there was also sometimes the parents would get frustrated in the sense that why can't you leave the device alone and just do this? So that was not happening a lot. So the child wanted the device to be around even if the child was not using it. So sometimes there'll be a video running which the child is not watching and doing other things, but finding comfort in the fact that the video is running.
What level of agency did the child have in deciding what apps that she wanted, whether or not they were gonna actually appear on the
No, I think the
iPad?
apps were chosen by the parents most of the time,
Okay.
but except that if she wanted a particular app and the parent would get to it, and it shows relevant apps next to it, and she'll just click on the one based on on how interesting the colors or the shapes are on the app, and not so much what it actually does.
So she never just showed up and was like, I want something where I can paint on the iPad?
Yes, and one more thing which I forgot to mention was that, so Ella bought a $2 app when she was 2. And after that, the first thing the parents did was to disable all the payment-based things, in-app purchases. So after that, she was told that whenever you see the word FREE, that's the only app you can buy, you can get, and not the paid ones. Yeah.
Does it ever use the iPad as a disciplinary tool? Like if she did something bad, would they take it away, or?
Yes, the parents did that and didn't work very well.
Yeah. I've seen it happen.
Yeah, in the sense it used to be a threatening thing that you take away the iPad, but it was like trying to be very mean to the child
Yeah.
at that point.
So you never use it as a reward punishment?
I think giving the child the assurance that it's yours and will not be taken away, but that you have to decide when to use it and when not to use it, and encouraging the child to do other things, not by threatening with the use or disuse of the device, but that was more effective as a strategy. And over a period of time, one thing that I forgot to mention was that the usage and the amount of time spent actually decreased from the age of 2, 2.5 to until by the time she was 3 to 4, because she didn't want to spend so much time on the device itself, and she was saying, this is boring to use it, I want to do other things.
Could I ask what it's like now? I assume she must be 5, 6, 7?
Yes, yeah. So, no, she still uses the device.
Of course,
Yes, but but she does a lot of other things in terms of painting, sketching, or reading, and other things. So the device is just like a television in the house.
What about people who think that children should be prevented from using that kind of digital devices till they reach 7 or 6?
Which is fine in the sense that every parent has a certain prerogative to bring up a child in a way the parent thinks is right for the child, or what the parent is comfortable with. But it's just that the only thing that I want to emphasize is that the parent has to emulate the behavior which you want the child to emulate. You have to project that behavior. So I'll use my device all the time, but you won't use it. That strategy doesn't work very well. And a lot of parents find that even if they want to limit it, they're not able to. That the child still wants it, and ultimately they give in. So the question is about how comfortable you want to be in that process. So if you're not comfortable as a parent, maybe you want to monitor what are the apps that the child is using, and provide only those things which you really want the child to learn at that point. There. And some parents I know do a good job of saying that you only can use it for half an hour. You earn your time, the iPad time or something, and it works. But the child is always wanting to use it. In that case, in Ella's case, she wasn't always wanting to use it. She wanted to do other things, because the iPad was sort of always there.
We call it the blue blanket. In my family, we always had the kid had their blankie them everywhere. You know, it's kind of like a security thing.
Security,
You
yeah,
know,
yeah.
it's like a doll or a blanket or something, you know.
Right, yeah. Any other questions?
An observation, Naresh. I think what's really interesting about this study, to me, and how you approached it, is seeing that these touch devices and, of course, the Apple operating system and all that, they're really objects. They're like toys. And I think start looking at it that way, it's a non-issue. I mean, I think the way you handled it, the way the parents handled it with the child, this is a toy, you're using it, there's no restrictions, you use it, child uses it, whatever, and it becomes this object. I love what you said, embodiment, taking it with her in the sandbox or in the bathroom. It's like a blue blanket.
Or a dolly,
Or
or
a
something,
dolly.
or teddy bear.
But it's a smart dolly. It's a very interactive one. And I see some of these devices more like objects. Like when I go to the computer store, the Apple store, whatever, I actually look at these devices as pieces of art. And I get engaged by that, how easy to use. Do I get to touch it and move things around? So it's very engaging and interactive. And that is what changes technology than it was, say, 10 years ago. We wouldn't have our kids in front of a computer for hours on end. I mean, I couldn't do it with my own son back in when was that, early 90s. You know, came in a computer for 10 hours, come on, we don't want a computer for 10 hours. It was not the same. There weren't toys, it was digital or whatever. We didn't have internet then, if I remember correctly. Now it's totally different. These devices are designed to become an extension.
Yes, and you can actually digitally flip pages of a book.
Yeah, of course. So, you
Yeah.
know, it's very fun and interesting. And there's Osmo, which is the app, the iPad that registers an actual object. And
Yes.
you come in, I mean, so it's
Yes,
very
so
interesting.
it's your app interacting with something physical, and
Right.
and you can do both
So I think
together.
this is a very interesting study because it's showing us that these devices with children are objects. They're not the same as a digital computer. And if you're aware of it, the way the parents handled it actually is smart. I mean, my kids are all big now. You know, I do this, you don't. I'm the mother, you know.
Right.
But now with the way I see how the parents did it with the child, you saw the device as a toy, as a physical thing to learn. The parents enjoy it, the child enjoy it, and there's no overreaching thinking about it. And the results, I think, ended up being quite positive in this particular single study situation.
Yes, and I do want to end with one quote by Jamshed Behesti, who is a co-editor of the book, and he said that it's amazing how you're able to pull off a study with a sample size of 1.
I'm impressed.
So that is, yeah.
Especially if it's your own kid.
Are you planning to have a follow-up study?
Yes, I'm not sure at this point. It was a very exhausting study, but yes, so hopefully there will be a follow-up. Thank you.
Thank you.